I'm Travis Frame, and this is Frame by Frame, and today will be the seventh episode of my analysis series. This episode deals with nihilism and pessimism in the three films, a very fun topic. And there will be spoilers for all three films, as I'll be talking about some of the plot details. So just keep that in mind when you're watching, or if you want to hold off on watching until after you've seen the films. So with that, I'll get into the seventh episode. So joyful and fun are not words that anyone would really use to describe these films. At least I don't think I've yet to meet anyone that would describe the films like that. They are bleak and very dark in tone. They could even be described as unnecessarily negative in some people's mind. This is because of all of the nihilistic and pessimistic elements that are included within them. Nihilism, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the rejection of all religious and moral principles and the belief that life is meaningless. And pessimism is defined as a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen, a lack of hope or confidence in the future. So, those being the technical definitions, the films not only have a very somber story, but often express a very negative outlook on life in general, with having commentary on the nature of society. Each of the three films include elements of nihilism, but it is not just these films that show this side of von Trier. But I think that they do show his nihilism and pessimism more so than any of his other films. Antichrist includes some very clear and present pessimism and nihilism. This can be seen in the bleak outlook that characters have towards life and everything around them. For the most part, they talk in a very bland, monotone way throughout the movie. However, the main element of nihilism can be seen in both the title and the research that she does that is spoken about in the film. I'll start with the title, and this can be a deceiving one, as the actual depiction of the Antichrist is never directly depicted within the film. One might just say that this is Lars von Trier giving the title to the film that is controversial simply for the sake of being controversial. However, as you might guess, I don't share that belief. I believe that the title of the film was chosen because of the connotations associated with the Antichrist. The cabin that he and she go to is called Eden. It is clear that an interpretation of the film is that he is Adam and that she is Eve. However, there are many differences between the two stories. Despite that, the differences between the film and the story of Adam and Eve, it could still be seen as representing the downfall of mankind, which is why I think that the title is fitting for the film. The title and the idea of the downfall and corruption of man can be linked with a very negative view of mankind and its future. The other clear, bleak view of mankind is the research that she does, which results in her own self-view. She studies the torture of women in history, and it is clear that at some point in time, she believes that this occurred because of the nature of women being inherently evil. She becomes so entranced by the horrors of her research that she begins to believe it about herself. She even begins to commit evil acts, believing it is in her nature to do so. This is a very pessimistic way to look at humankind, and I don't believe von Trier is saying that mankind or womankind are inherently evil, but instead commenting on the folly of this belief and the destructive effects it has. He doesn't believe that women have this evil inside of them, but he is commenting on the fact that someone who has a fragile state of mind, like she, who is affected by depression, these negative ideas could take hold and could have a really, really negative impact on someone who is in a already negative mindset. And he's trying to show this with the film. Following this, in Melancholia, the themes of pessimism and nihilism connect strongly to the central ideas. They're core to the film. The entirety of the film deals with the feeling of hopelessness and the inevitability of disaster. Now, nihilism doesn't necessarily always result directly in a feeling of hopelessness, but I can definitely see them being heavily connected in von Trier's mind. This film is probably the most clear representation of these themes, as there is quite literally nothing they can do, and the end is literally inevitable. This, as stated earlier, heavily connects to the emotion that von Trier is trying to convey to the audience. He wants them to feel the same hopelessness that the characters feel. The film exemplifies the outlook that von Trier may have on society and the world in general. It could be interpreted that he believes that it is hopeless to trust in society and that we are already beyond help in terms of fixing all the wrongs that exist in the world. The pessimism in the film is less so a case of von Trier's possible state of mind and more of a representation of feelings associated with depression. However, it does still heavily exemplify these things. The characters do try to manufacture a happy ending. However, in their final moments, they try to make the most out of it before the collision happens. This seems to counteract some of the ideas that von Trier expresses, as he is potentially trying to convey the idea that even in the face of inescapable outcome, we should try to remain positive. This could be von Trier showing that he is in fact neither a pessimist or a nihilist, but in fact wants people to relish the life that they have and take advantage of every fleeting second. Maybe despite his negative outlook on life resulting from his depression, through his recovery and progress regarding his mental health, he gained a very positive outlook on life. However, the positive outlook on life is essentially nowhere to be found in *Nymphomaniac*. This film has essentially a negative outlook on everything from relationships to love to life and everything in between. *Nymphomaniac's negative outlook on these aspects is reflective of the way that Jo views the world. Jo believes that she is inherently a sinful and bad person and commits actions to try to fill a void in her soul. These actions that cause a continuing spiral for her that only ever cause more harm and thus more negative self-image. However, she is never aided by society, as I talked about in an earlier video. The people around her, with the exception of Seligman, constantly criticize her and put her down, ever attempting to help a clearly broken and damaged person. She only seeks help once, and despite the fact that the help group she goes to is full of people that legitimately want to help her, her outlook has been clouded by her experiences with the other people. It is not too late for Jo to get help, because it's never too late to get help, but in her mind, there is no one that unselfishly wants to help her. She views people in the group as trying to help her for their own selfish needs, leading to her continuing to reject help. The closest thing to really helping her is when she believes that she's fallen in love with Jerome. However, when this falls apart, it represents another very negative view of love, along with the already established anti-love nature of the film. However, the biggest moment of pessimism and nihilism with relation to society, perhaps, in the entire trilogy comes at the very end of this film, and is kind of fitting because the film is the conclusion of the trilogy and ends with the most pessimistic note. It happens when Seligman completely breaks the character that we know and attempts to rape Jo. Von Trier presents his ultimate showing of his distrust of society. Seligman is a character that over the course of 4 to 5.5 hours, depending on the versions of the film that you watched, is a character that the audience grows to like. In a series of full pessimism and negativity, Seligman is presented as the apparent personification of optimism and hopefulness. I think this is what makes the scene so shocking. As a person, we think is quite literally the last person who would do such a thing, attempts to commit such an atrocious evil act, just an absolutely vile and disgusting act. The primary and only confidant of Jo's life story has turned on her and apparently just decides to manipulate her. It brings into question the nature of humanity and what were Seligman's intentions throughout the course of the entire conversation. Von Trier wants the viewer to think this because of how much negativity he feels in general and towards society. The one person Jo thought she could trust was in fact just like every other man she had encountered. And he was potentially only interested in manipulating her nymphomania. Was Seligman planning to try to rape her from the very beginning when he found her on the street? Was Seligman goaded into this action after his corrupt primal nature decided to take advantage of a person in need? Was it simply that he was in a position of seemingly more power than this injured woman? Von Trier wants the viewer to ponder all of these things. It is a tragic and unfortunate ending, and the fact that it ends with Jo essentially right back where she started makes it that much sadder. The choice to kill Seligman is a moment of triumph for Jo, though, but it, again, still does put her back in the same place. Seligman's death might be meant to represent that Jo is truly ready to accept help and move towards change, which would be a more optimistic way of interpreting the film, but I don't entirely believe that this is what Von Trier was going for. He wants the viewer to hate Seligman and hate society and be frustrated at the selfishness and negativity of our culture. He is furious, and maybe Slytherin's death is meant to represent the idea that we should destroy this portion of society, and that is composed of deceivers and cons. Obviously, he wants to destroy this element of this misinterpreted friendship and this ultimate betrayal. He wants a truthful and helpless society that is willing to listen with nothing to gain from listening, for people to just be there for others. Von Trier expresses a very complex view on the world in these three films. Maybe nihilism and pessimism aren't always the right words to describe his sentiment, but I believe that these two terms encapsulate the ideas that he is generally trying to get across. He wants to be hopeful. He clearly wants it very badly, but it is impossible for him when our society is so corrupt and greedy. He says that we need to change stigmas in order to change society, and only then is hopefulness justified. This is a very negative way of thinking, but Von Trier does present reasons why he believes this throughout the films and tries to communicate his emotions so that the viewer can most accurately understand his feelings about life and society. He doesn't just throw out these negative ideas, these pessimistic ideas, and these nihilistic ideas for no reason. He wants you to understand why he thinks them. He's not just stating an opinion, he's stating why. And I think that that's an incredibly important part of understanding why he does it, why he has this element to the films, why he doesn't want to make these happy films with happy endings. And that's part of Von Trier, and that's part of these films. The next episode won't be much brighter of an episode, as I will be talking about the disturbing elements. But until next time, thank you for listening to me talk about the nihilism and pessimism in the Von Trier films. And until the next episode.